I took the job at the Holloway County Sheriff's Department because nobody else in 3 counties would have me. That's the truth of it, and I've stopped dressing it up. When you've got a record, you learn fast that the world sorts you into a smaller box than the one you were born into, and you either fit yourself inside it or you go hungry. I was tired of going hungry. I was 34 years old, $1,100 behind on a truck I still needed for work, and sending what I could to my mother every month, which was never enough and never on time. So when the call came that the Property and Evidence Division needed a night clerk, and that they were aware of my situation and willing to overlook it, I didn't ask why. You don't ask why when a door opens. You just walk through it before it closes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been processed by a system like this one once, on the wrong side of the counter, and now here I was filling out my own hiring forms in a building that smelled like the one where they'd taken my prints. People think a record is one bad night. It isn't. It's a thing that follows you into every room for the rest of your life, sitting quiet in a drawer somewhere, waiting to be pulled. Mine started the night my brother Marcus called me from a parking lot off the county road, his voice gone thin and high the way it got when he was past the point of fixing anything, and told me he'd done something and the car was still warm and he didn't know what to do. He was 4 years younger than me. I'd been pulling him out of holes since we were kids, since our father left and our mother started working doubles, and I became the one who answered when Marcus cried in the night. So I drove out there. Of course I drove out there. I won't lay out the whole of it, because it's not the part that matters, and because there are things a man keeps even from himself. But by the time the deputies came, I'd decided. Marcus had a future or he had nothing, and I was the older brother, and I'd been carrying him so long I didn't know how to set him down. So I said it was me. I said the words and I signed the paper, and the plea went through, and the thing became official the way only paper can make a thing official. That was the lesson that lived in me long before I ever set foot in that basement. A signature outlives the reason you signed it. The truth was that I'd been in the back, that I hadn't even seen it happen, but the paper said otherwise, and the paper won. The paper always wins. I learned that at 26, and I never unlearned it. And here's the thing that breaks me looking back. It didn't even save him. Marcus walked free on the back of what I signed, and he didn't get better. He got worse, the way the saved often do when they learn they can be saved. We don't talk about how it ended, in my family. It's the broken stair you step over and keep climbing, but I carried it. I carried the specific weight of a man who made a lie permanent to protect someone the lie couldn't protect. And I want you to hold that in your mind as I tell the rest. Because that wound is the reason I could walk into a place built on filing the future and keep my head down long after I should have run. I already believed paperwork was stronger than truth. The room only confirmed it. The woman who hired me was named Marlene, and she ran the property room the way some people run a kitchen they've worked in for 40 years, every motion already worn smooth. The first thing I noticed, sitting across from her with my application between us, was that my start date was already filled in on the intake sheet. In ink, in handwriting that wasn't mine and didn't match the rest of the form, older somehow, the way old ink goes a little brown at the edges. I figured a secretary had pre-filled it. I figured a lot of things those first nights. That's what I'd like you to understand before I tell you the rest. I wasn't a fool. I just wanted the job, and wanting something that badly makes you good at not seeing. The evidence room was in the basement of a municipal building that went up sometime in the 70s and hadn't been loved since. You went down a back stairwell with a handrail painted so many times it had gone soft at the corners, and at the bottom there was a steel door with a keypad that only worked if you hit the 4 a little harder than the rest. Inside it was one long concrete corridor, lit by fluorescent tubes, with steel mesh cages running down both sides, gray metal shelving, bankers' boxes with handwritten labels gone soft and furred at the edges from the damp, a whole wall of locked racks for the firearms, the steel dull under the lights, and along one side, an old logbook the size of a family Bible, sitting next to a computer that everyone treated like a guest who'd overstayed. There was a smell down there I never fully placed. Cold cardboard mostly, that flat, dusty sweetness boxes get when they've sat in the dark for years, and the plastic of evidence bags, a chemical tang that caught in the back of your throat, and gun oil from the racks, heavy and metallic. But underneath all that was something else, faint, a little like copper. A little like the air right before it rains. I'd catch it and lose it. Some nights I'd stop mid-task, sure I was about to name it, and then it would be gone and I'd feel almost foolish for chasing it. A dehumidifier ran constantly in the corner, a low gray hum you stopped hearing after an hour and then heard again all at once in the dead middle of the night, the way you hear your own heartbeat when the house goes quiet. It pulled the water out of the air and dripped it slow into a tank I had to empty every shift, and there was something about that, about a machine working all night to keep the past dry, that I never got used to. One of the fluorescent tubes near the back never stopped flickering. I asked Marlene about it my first week, said I'd swap it out if she pointed me to the supply closet. She told me not to bother, that it had been like that since before she started, and that the maintenance man had replaced it twice, and it had gone right back to flickering both times. The way she said it, flat and unbothered, like she was telling me which copier jammed, that should have told me something, but I just nodded. I had a list of things in my head I wasn't going to be picky about, and a flickering light was near the top. After a while, I came to think of that tube as the heartbeat of the place. It stuttered over the back shelves like it couldn't quite commit to staying lit, and the shadows under it never sat still, and I learned to do my counting elsewhere. She trained me over 2 shifts, and I want to lay out the procedure she taught me because the procedure is the whole thing, really. The horror of that place wasn't a monster. It was a method. When evidence came in, it came with a property form, and you logged it in the book and in the computer both, because nobody trusted the computer alone. You wrote the case number, the description, the officer who brought it, and the date it was received. Then you took the date stamp, the old mechanical kind with the little rubber wheels you turned to set the numbers, and you stamped the form. Simple work, honest work even. I liked it at first. There's a peace in handling objects that have a place to go, in a world that had spent years telling me I didn't have one. The one thing Marlene drilled into me, over and over, was the date. She'd watch me set the stamp and she'd say, "Check it again." And I'd check it, and it would be right, today's date, and she'd nod. The second night, a bag came down from upstairs and I started to log it and reached for the stamp, and she put her hand flat on the form, not hard, just resting it there, and she said, "Not yet." I looked at her. The form was filled out. The bag was sealed. I didn't understand what we were waiting for, and she said the thing I would hear, in one form or another, from every single person who worked in that building. She said, "We don't log it early, we log it on time." I asked her what that meant. She said it meant exactly what it sounded like, and went to refill her coffee. That was Marlene. She'd give you a sentence and let you wear yourself out on it. So I set the bag aside on a little metal cart she kept for that purpose, and I went on to the next thing. And I didn't think about it again until much later, when I understood that the cart was always there, and there was always something on it waiting for its date to arrive. Those first weeks I settled into the rhythm of the night. There's a particular loneliness to working underground, while a whole town sleeps above you. Upstairs there was usually a dispatcher, and now and then a deputy passing through, but the basement was mine. I'd bring a sandwich and eat it standing up around 2 in the morning. There was a vending machine at the top of the stairs that only took quarters, and a coffee maker in the break room that made coffee the color of weak tea, no matter how much you put in it. I'd hear the highway out past the parking lot, that endless low rush of trucks running the interstate at night, and somehow it made the quiet bigger instead of smaller. There was a phone mounted on the wall in the corridor, an old beige thing with a curled cord gone gray with handling. Some nights it would ring, just once, a single sharp note, and stop. I'd walk over and pick it up, and there'd be nothing, not even a dial tone, just a kind of held silence, like a room on the other end with someone in it not speaking. The first few times it rattled me. I'd say hello into it like a fool, twice, 3 times, into that quiet that wasn't empty so much as occupied. Then it became part of the building's noise, like the dehumidifier, like the flicker. You'd be surprised what you can fold into normal when you need a job badly enough. That's the part nobody warns you about. The mind wants to keep the peace it's found. It will paper over almost anything to keep from having to be afraid in a place it can't afford to leave. The first wrong date came on a Tuesday, or what was left of one, sometime past midnight. A property bag had been left on the intake shelf, sealed, with the form clipped to it. I picked it up to log it, and my eyes went to the received date the way they always did now, Marlene's training having burrowed in, and the date was wrong. It was the next day, Wednesday. The form said the bag had been received on Wednesday, and it was still, by any clock or calendar I trusted, Tuesday night. I almost laughed. I figured a deputy had filled out the form ahead, gotten the date wrong, the kind of small mistake any tired person makes. I looked in the bag the way you do, just to log the contents. A man's wallet, worn soft, and a state ID inside it. The name on the ID meant nothing to me at the time. I want to be honest about that, because later it would mean a great deal. But that night it was just a name, a stranger's name, and I set the bag on the cart with the others waiting for their dates, and I made a note to mention it to Marlene, and I went back to my book. I did mention it. The next afternoon when our shifts crossed, I told her there'd been a bag dated wrong, dated for the next day, and that I'd put it on the cart. I expected her to say, "Oh, that idiot Ostrowski can't read a calendar," or something. Instead, she didn't say anything for a moment. She took the bag off the cart, looked at the form without really reading it, the way you look at something you already know by heart, and she put it on a shelf in the section near the back, the one under the flickering tube. Then she said, "You did right," and asked me if the coffee machine had been acting up, just like that. Changed the subject so smoothly I almost followed her into it. But I stood there for a second too long, watching the spot where she'd shelved it, and I felt the first real cold come up through me. Not fear yet, just the sense that I'd put my hand on something in the dark and felt it move. It was Hutch who gave me the first real warning, if you can call it that. Hutch was the night dispatcher most weeks, a younger guy, maybe 26, who chewed the skin around his thumbnails and couldn't sit still. We'd talk sometimes when I came up for the vending machine. He'd been trying to transfer out for over a year, he told me, to a desk job in the next county over, somewhere with windows. He always said that part, somewhere with windows, like daylight was a thing you had to apply for. He'd put in the paperwork 3 times. The first time it came back for a missing signature. The second time they told him he'd used the wrong version of the form, an old one, even though it was the one stocked in the supply room. The third time it was a date that didn't match between 2 pages. And he swore to me he'd filled both in on the same morning with the same pen. And I believed him, because by then I'd started to understand how that building handled dates. He laughed about it, but it wasn't a real laugh. He kept a photograph taped inside his desk drawer, his girl and a baby, and the desk job in the next county was 40 minutes closer to them, and 40 minutes is the difference between seeing your kid awake and seeing them asleep when you get home. He told me that once, late, the only time he ever said anything that wasn't a joke. One night I asked him, just making conversation, whether he'd ever worked down in property. He stopped chewing his thumb. He said no, and he said he didn't go down there if he could help it. And when I asked why, he gave me a look I'd see again on other faces in that building, a look that wanted to tell me something and had learned the hard way that telling didn't help. He said, "You don't read the labels down there, you just log 'em." I asked him what that meant. He shrugged and said, "That's the job, man, that's the whole job, don't make it more than it is." And then he went back to talking about his transfer, about how if it came through he'd be gone before the snow, and I let him, because I understood by then that some men talk about the door they're never going to walk through the way other men pray. After that I started noticing the dates everywhere. Once you see a thing you can't unsee it. It wasn't every bag. Most of what came down was ordinary, dated for the day it arrived, normal in every way, but every few nights there'd be one. A form received tomorrow, a bag dated for next week. And they all went the same place, the cart, and then the back shelves under the bad light, and Marlene never logged them on the day they came. She logged them, I came to realize, on the date written on the form. She'd hold them, sometimes for days, and on the morning the date finally caught up, she'd take that one down, stamp it, and slide it into the system like it had just arrived. We don't log it early, we log it on time. There was one that came a few weeks in that I haven't been able to put down since. A bag, dated 9 days out, and inside it a child's bicycle helmet, blue, a little small, scuffed at the crown the way they get, and a single sneaker. That was all. A helmet and one shoe and a form with a date that hadn't happened. I stood with it under the flickering tube for a long time. There was no name I recognized on the form, just a case number and the county road it referenced, a stretch of road I drove most nights on my way in. And I thought, this is a child, this is some child who is right now asleep in a house somewhere, alive, with both shoes, and in 9 days something is going to happen on that road. I told myself it was a typo. I told myself 100 things. But I wrote the road and the date on the back of my hand, and I drove that stretch the next morning slow, looking like I could spot a future from a moving truck. And of course there was nothing, just guardrail and gravel, and the long flat light, and I felt like a madman, and I went home and slept badly. 9 days later I came in, and the bag was gone from the back shelf, logged, on time. I didn't ask. I'd learned that much. But I read the paper that week, the little county paper they still print, and I won't say what I found, only that I found enough, and that the helmet was blue, and that I have never since been able to drive that road without slowing down at the place I now know the place to be. There was one I tried to stop. I have to tell it because it's the one that taught me there was no use. A bag came down with a name on the form, a full name, dated 11 days out, and a local address, and the contents listed told a story I didn't want to read, a name I could find, so I found it. The man worked at the feed store out on the highway, an ordinary man with a sunburned neck, and I drove out there on my day off and I stood at his counter, and I bought a thing I didn't need and I tried, I swear to you I tried, to find the words. What do you say? You don't know me. Be careful. Stay home on the 14th. Don't trust the man you trust. I didn't even know what to warn him against. Only the date. So I said something clumsy. I said, take care of yourself out there. The roads are bad this time of year. And he looked at me the way you look at a stranger who stood too long at your counter. And he said, you too, friend. And I left. 3 days later, a deputy brought a bag down, and clipped to it was a witness statement, and the statement was mine. My clumsy words at the feed store counter, written up, dated, logged into the case as a recorded interaction with the subject prior to the incident. I hadn't given any statement. No one had asked me anything, but there it was. My visit folded neatly into the file, become evidence, become part of the very thing I'd driven out there to prevent. I understood then, fully and for the first time, that you could not stand outside the record and reach in to change it. The moment you touched it, you were in it. The warning didn't fail. The warning became the chain. That was when I stopped trying to drive ahead of the dates. The pattern broke open for me completely the night an entire intake box came down. Not a single bag, a whole box, the kind that holds a full case. The label on the side gave a date almost a full week out. I lifted the lid because I had to log the contents, and inside were sealed bags, a phone, a set of car keys, a flannel shirt folded the way the lab folds things, all of it pristine, none of it touched, all of it received, according to the paperwork, on a day that hadn't happened. I stood there with the lid in my hand for a long time. The dehumidifier hummed, the bad tube flickered, and I felt the floor of the world tilt under me just slightly, the way the deck of a boat moves when you've been telling yourself the water's flat. That was the night I went into the old logbooks. There was a row of them on a low shelf, the years stamped on their spines in gold that had mostly rubbed away, going back decades. I pulled one at random, from 1981, the year I wasn't even born. I sat on an overturned milk crate, and I read it by the flickering light, and at first it was just what you'd expect. Case numbers and descriptions, and dates in a dozen different hands. The daily traffic of a county that had been losing people and money for 40 years. But then I started checking the received dates against the entries around them, the way I'd learned to, and I found them, entries dated ahead of the entries on either side. A bag received in March, logged in a column of February intakes, and next to a few of them, in a different ink, added later, a small note, a date, and a word or two. The word was usually occurred, and a date, and that date was always the date the bag had said all along. I sat there with that book open on my knees and I understood something I had no language for. The room didn't record what had happened. It received what was going to. And someone, for 40 years and longer, had been quietly writing in the back of the book, after the fact, confirming that the thing had come to pass on the day the paperwork always knew it would. The handwriting in those confirmation notes changed over the years. Different clerks. Marlene's was in there. The later years, her cramped, careful print. And before her, others, hands I'd never see, people who'd sat on this same milk crate under this same broken light and made the same small notes and gone home and never told a soul, because who would believe them, and because the rent was due. There was a cage at the very back of the corridor that I'd noticed from the start and learned to walk past. It had a paper sign on it, hold, do not process, in faded marker. The cage was empty, not empty like unused, swept and bare, empty like reserved. There was a rectangle taped out on the concrete floor inside it, the kind you'd tape to show where a box should sit, the outline of a space waiting to be filled. I'd never seen anything go in there. But the outline was there, exact, deliberate, and there was a date written small in the corner of the tape, and I made myself not look at it for a long time, and then one night I looked, and it was a date a few weeks out, and below it a case number, and I wrote that case number on the inside of my wrist with a pen, because I didn't trust myself to remember it right, and I didn't dare write it anywhere they might find. I'm telling you all this in order, the way it happened, because if I tell it any other way it sounds like I should have run. But you have to understand how it comes. It comes one date at a time. It comes wrapped in routine, handed to you by tired people who treat it like the copier in the coffee machine, who've decided the only way to survive it is to never once say out loud how strange it is. And I needed the job. I want to say that again because it's the truest thing in this whole account. I needed the job. Every wrong date was a thing I could choose not to understand for one more shift. And one more shift was another night closer to the rent, and that math kept me down in that basement long past the point a smarter or freer man would have left. Then I found the tape. It was in a sleeve in the audio section, where the old cassette recordings were kept, statements and interviews from the years before everything went digital, and even after, because the department had a habit of keeping the old machines running long past their time. The sleeves were filed by name and date, and I was pulling one for a case Marlene had flagged, and my fingers went past a label and stopped and went back, and there it was. My name, Reyes, D, and the word interview, and a date. The date was the next day, tomorrow. I have tried many times to describe what that felt like, and I keep coming up short. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was the opposite. It was a great cold quiet, like all the noise of my own life went out at once. I held the sleeve and I read my name 3 or 4 times to be sure I wasn't reading it into someone else's, but it was mine. The initial, the spelling, and tomorrow's date in that same brown-edged ink as the start date on my hiring form. An interview. With me. Recorded. Filed. Waiting on a shelf in a basement for a thing that, by every clock I owned, had not yet happened, and that I had no memory of agreeing to. I should tell you I put it back. A wiser man would have put it back. I took it to the old player, the one with the buttons worn shiny, and I slid the cassette out of the sleeve and I held it for a while before I let myself put it in. My hands weren't even shaking. I think I'd gone somewhere past shaking. I pressed play. There was the hiss of old tape, the room tone of a small space, and then a voice, asking a question I couldn't quite make out, the words swallowed by the machine. And then a second voice answered, calm and tired and a little flat, the voice of a man who has decided to cooperate. It was my voice. It was unmistakably my own voice, answering a question I had not been asked, saying, I didn't see who it was. I was in the back. I heard it, but I didn't see. The machine ate the rest. The tape snagged or the head slipped, some old mechanical failure, and the sentence cut off, and the hiss came back, and that was all. I sat there in the basement with my own future voice ringing in the cold air and the dehumidifier humming and the bad light flickering, and I pressed stop, and I took the tape out, and I put it back in its sleeve, and put the sleeve back exactly where it had been, lined up flush with the others, because some animal part of me did not want that shelf to know it had been touched. And I sat with the worst of it, which was not the impossibility of the thing, but the words themselves. I was in the back. I heard it, but I didn't see. The same shape as the lie I'd signed at 26. As if the room had reached into the one place I'd buried deepest and pulled out the exact phrasing of my oldest wound and handed it back to me as my future, I decided to quit. I want that on the record, too. I sat down the next morning, the morning the date on the tape had become today, and I wrote out in my head everything I'd say. I'd tell Marlene I had a family thing, that I needed to move. Anything. I didn't care if she believed it. I drove in early, but quitting that place, it turned out, was not a thing you could just do. When I went up to the front office to ask about my final check, the clerk there, a woman I barely knew, told me pleasantly that any separation required exit documentation, and that the exit documentation couldn't be processed until my outstanding case file was closed. I asked her what case file. She turned the monitor a little and showed me, and there was my name and a case number, and the case number matched the one I'd written on my wrist weeks before, the one from the taped outline in the empty cage at the back of the room. Below my name, the file said, pending statement. And then she said, oh, and you're on the schedule for tonight. And I looked, and I was. I was on the schedule for that night, and the night after, and the whole week to come, my name typed in the same as always, like nothing had changed. Like a man whose own recorded statement was sitting on a shelf downstairs was just a regular employee with shifts to work. I understood then, standing at that counter with my paycheck dangling in front of me like bait, that there was no door. There had never been a door. The start date in old ink, the file already open, the tape already recorded. I hadn't been hired to log evidence. I'd been brought in because I was already in the system, the way my brother had been, the way I had been once before, a name written down ahead of time and a future already filed. I went down to the basement that afternoon because I didn't know what else to do, and Marlene was there finishing her shift, and I think she saw it on my face. She'd been there long enough to know what a man looked like the day he found his own tape. She poured me a cup of that terrible coffee, and she set it down next to me, and she sat on the milk crate, and for a while neither of us said anything. The dehumidifier ran, the light flickered, and then she told me the truth, the only way that place ever told it, sideways and incomplete. She said, "The room doesn't make it happen. People think that when they first figure it out, they think the room reaches into the world and does it. It doesn't. It just keeps it. We're not police, Danny. We don't stop crimes and we don't solve them. We're storage. The county pays us to hold things until they're due, and then we log them. And then they're real on paper the same day they're real in the world. And the chain of custody is clean, and nobody upstairs ever has to know the chain started before the thing did." She drank her coffee, and then she told me about the watch. She said, "I held a bag with my husband's watch in it for 9 days once. It came down on a Monday, and I knew his watch. I'd given it to him. I'd had his initials put on the back of it myself at a little shop that's closed now. And the form said it would be received in 9 days, and the contents were his watch and his wedding band and a few other things a man carries, the things they bag up after. So I had 9 days. I went home those 9 nights, and I sat across the supper table from him, and I watched him wind that watch before bed the way he did every night of our marriage, and I didn't say a word, because what was there to say, and because I'd learned what happens when you try to say it." She stopped there. She said the watch was on the cart the whole time, ticking. She could hear it ticking from across the room some nights, 9 days of it, and on the 9th day she logged it on time, and went home to a quiet house, and wound it once more herself before she put it away. That was all she said about it. She didn't say how he died, and I didn't ask, and that silence was the loudest thing in the room. I asked her the only question that mattered to me. I asked, "Can you change it? If it's just storage, if it's just paper, can you not log it? Can you lose the tape? Can you let the date pass without stamping it?" And she looked at me with something that was almost pity and almost envy, the look of a person watching someone else stand where she'd stood a long time ago. She said, "You can try. People have. The dates don't pass clean when you try. The thing finds another form to come in." She said it plainly, no drama in it, and then she stood and rinsed her cup and put on her coat. She said, "You'll do the interview tonight. It's easier if you just do it." And she left, and I never spoke to her again, though that wasn't clear to me yet. I found my brother's box that night. I wasn't looking for it. I think I'd been avoiding the family name section the whole time I'd worked there, the way you avoid a photograph in your own house. But I was pulling something nearby, and my hand went where it shouldn't, and there was a box with our last name on it and his first name under it, Marcus, in a hand I didn't know, and a date, and the date was the date he died, the thing we step over and don't speak of. And I stood there, and I made myself read the received date in the corner of the form, the date the box came into the property room, and it was 11 days before he died. 11 days. The room had it 11 days early. I want you to sit in that with me the way I had to. For 11 days, while my brother was still alive, still somewhere out in the world where a telephone might have reached him, where I might have driven to wherever he was, and sat with him through one more bad night the way I'd done 100 times before. His box sat on that cart and ticked down its date, like Marlene's husband's watch. I could have called him. In those 11 days, I think I did call him, once, and he didn't pick up, and I told myself he was sleeping it off, and I didn't try again, and all the while his things were folded and bagged and waiting in a basement I didn't yet work in. The last argument we ever had, I'd told him I was done, that I couldn't keep saving a man who didn't want to be saved, that I'd given him my own clean name once, and he'd spent it like everything else. I'd meant it as a wall. I see now, it was a door I shut, and the room had known, 11 days out, that the door was shut for good. I didn't open the box. I want you to know I had the right, in a way, more right than anyone, and I didn't open it. I stood there, and I felt the rage come up and find nowhere to go, no one to hit, no villain to blame, just a county building and a method and a line of tired people stretching back 40 years who'd all made the same small, terrible piece. The horror of that place was never that it could see the future. The horror was that it had seen my brother's and filed it, and that filing him correctly had mattered more to everyone in the chain than the 11 days he had left. And the worst of it, the thing I carry now heavier than the plea I signed, is that I'm not sure I'd have done anything different even knowing I'd already shut the door. The room just kept what I'd thrown away. I put the box back. I lined the label up flush. I have never in my life done anything harder. The interview was at 9 that night, in a small room upstairs I'd never been in, off the back hall past dispatch. Ostrovsky was the one who came to get me. the deputy who dropped things off and never looked at the back shelves, and he didn't look at me much either, just said they needed a statement and it wouldn't take long. The room had a table and 2 chairs and a recorder, not even a new one of the old cassette machines like the one downstairs. There was a fresh tape in it, and a sleeve sitting next to it, and the sleeve was blank, waiting for a label. He turned the machine on. I heard it catch and start to turn, that soft mechanical pull I knew from the basement, and something in me went very still. He asked me to state my name, and I did, and my voice in that little room sounded exactly like the voice on the tape, the same flatness, like I'd already practiced being this calm. He asked me about an incident, and he used the past tense. He asked me what I'd seen earlier that night, and earlier that night nothing had happened. I had been in the basement the whole time, and I knew, the way you know a thing in a dream, that whatever the questions described was still coming, was waiting somewhere in the hours ahead the way the box had waited 11 days for my brother. I could feel the shape of the moment, the fork in it. I could refuse. I could stand up and walk out and let the tape run empty and find out what Marlene meant about the date not passing clean. I sat there with the recorder turning, and I thought about all of it at once. My brother, the watch, the feed store man, the blue helmet, the warning that became the chain. And I answered, I don't fully know why, and I've stopped pretending I'll ever fully know. Part of it was Marlene's voice. It's easier if you just do it. Part of it was the 11 days, the knowledge that fighting it just made it find another form, that even my warnings became evidence. And part of it, the part I'm least proud of and most honest about, was that after a lifetime of being processed, after the plea and the record and the door that was never a door, there was a terrible relief in finally just cooperating with the paperwork that owned me. I'd spent my whole life learning that the paper wins. There's a kind of rest in stopping the fight. He asked who I'd seen, and I heard myself say it, slow, the words arriving in my mouth like they'd been there for years. I didn't see who it was. I was in the back. I heard it, but I didn't see. The exact words, the exact flat-tired calm of the tape downstairs. I was recording the thing I'd already heard myself say, closing the loop with my own voice, putting my own future into the chain of custody one sentence at a time. And it was the same sentence I'd lived once before. The lie I'd told to save my brother, come back around to be told again. True this time and just as useless. When it was done, Ostrowski popped the tape, slid it in the sleeve, and wrote on the label, my name, the word interview, and the date, and I watched my own hand of fate get filed in front of me, and I did not say a word. Whatever happened later that night, I'll tell you plainly, I never fully learned, and I've made my peace with not knowing, the way I've made peace with the rest. There was an incident. There always is. The intake box that had sat dated a week out came due, and the things in it became real, and the case I'd given my statement for closed clean, and my exit documentation was no longer the thing standing in my way, because by then I no longer wanted to leave. That's the part that frightens me most looking back. I stopped wanting to leave. The wanting just went out of me, quietly, like the light going out of the day, and what was left was a man who knew the procedure and had nowhere better to be. Marlene's name came off the schedule the following week. I noticed it the way you notice a sound that stopped. I asked the front office, and they said she'd retired, and the way they said it was smooth and final, and I knew not to ask more. I cleaned out her locker because someone had to, and there wasn't much in it, a spare cardigan, a thermos, a photograph turned face down that I didn't turn over, though I knew, I think, whose it was, and that the watch in it would be on his wrist. And a few days after that, doing my rounds in the back, I found a box on the hold shelf in the cage with the taped outline, and the outline was filled now, the box sat exactly inside it, and the label had her name on it, and the receive date was the day she came off the schedule. I logged it on time. I had become the kind of man who could do that. I want you to understand, that's not a confession of strength. It's the opposite. It's what the place makes of you, given long enough and a debt big enough. It didn't happen in a single night. It happened the way the cold gets into a building in autumn, a little more each shift, until one morning you realize you've stopped noticing it, that the strange has become the routine, and the routine has become you. I'd check a date and feel the old cold and then not feel it. I'd hold a future in my hands and set it on the cart and go eat my sandwich. There was a week I caught myself humming, down there, under the flickering tube, and I stopped, because the man I used to be would have been horrified, and the man I was becoming just wanted to finish the count and go home. They moved me to days, to Marlene's old role, which is to say they handed me the cart and the stamp and the back shelves and the books, and they brought in a night clerk to take my place downstairs, a kid named Pruitt, 22, a record like mine, no other door open to him. He had a way of cracking his knuckles one at a time before he started a task, a nervous boy's habit, and he called me sir, which I told him to stop, and he never did. He told me the second night that he was saving up to get a tooth fixed, a front one that had gone bad, that he didn't smile in photos because of it, and that this job was going to be the thing that finally got it fixed. I don't know why that detail stuck in me the way it did. A boy who wanted to be able to smile. I trained him over 2 shifts the way I'd been trained. I taught him the logbook and the computer nobody trusts, and the stamp with the little rubber wheels. I taught him to check the date, always check the date. And I watched him fold the flickering tube and the dehumidifier and the phone that rings once into the background of his nights, the way I had, the way you do when you need the work. And I felt the old cold come up in me, not for myself anymore, but for him, and even that cold was quiet now, worn smooth. I found the tape 3 nights ago. I wasn't looking for it. My hand went where it knew to go, the audio section, and there was a sleeve filed among the others, and the name on it was Pruitt, and the word was interview, and the date was a few weeks out, the same brown-edged ink, the same as mine, the same as the start date on a hiring form he probably hasn't thought about since. I held it for a while. I thought about putting it in the player. I thought about a great many things, standing there under the light that has flickered since before any of us came and will flicker after we're all filed. And then I slid it back into its place and lined the label up flush, because some part of me still doesn't want that shelf to know it's been touched. Pruitt asked me about it the next day, actually. He'd been down in the audio section and he'd seen a sleeve dated wrong, dated ahead. And he came to me the way I'd gone to Marlene, with that same look on his face, half a question and half a hope that I'd tell him it was nothing. He asked if we should log it, since the date was already filled in, since everything else about it looked done. And I looked at him, this kid with a record and a bad tooth and nowhere else to go, this kid whose own voice is already waiting on a shelf to say something he hasn't said yet, and I felt the whole length of that chain stretch out behind me, all the tired hands and all the back of the book notes going back 40 years and more, and I understood that I was just the next hand now, the next keeper, the next quiet link, and I told him no. I told him what I'd been told, the only true thing that place ever taught me, the sentence that holds the whole method inside it like a fist around a coin. I told him, we don't log it early. We log it on time.